The incessant search for happiness and serenity is a common journey to all of us. In a world full of expectations, charges, and goals, we often see each other overwhelmed by what we insist on keeping in our lives, even when it no longer serves us. According to deep teachings, such as those of Buddhist monks, much of human suffering comes from this attachment. True freedom and peace begin with the simple but challenging act of releasing. When we talk about releasing, we are not just talking about objects or situations. We are referring to habits, thinking patterns, and even relationships that, while seemingly or comfortable, only serve to block our inner flow. The first step in achieving a state of greater balance and peace is to eliminate the invisible currents that bind us. The idea of living lightly does not mean giving up or giving up things, but understanding that it is possible to let everything that does not do us good, that it does not help us grow. We live in a society that teaches us from an early age to seek recognition, external satisfaction, and perfection. We hope everything will happen according to our plans, and when it doesn't happen, we feel frustration and discouragement. However, the truth is that life rarely follows the scripts we have created for it. Suffering arises just as we refuse to accept reality as it is, rather than accepting the natural flow of events. The first lock we need to learn to release is attachment to unreal expectations. We often create in our mind a perfect world where everything fits, where people act as we expect, and situations happen exactly the way we want. However, this expectation makes us vulnerable. Suffering settles when what we imagine as perfect does not materialize and we see ourselves forced to deal with disappointment. It is important to remember that life does not have to be perfect to be good, and that peace often is in accepting what it is already. Buddhism teaches us that suffering is born when we resist what it is. We created an ideal image of how things should be, and when this image is not accomplished, we are disappointed. The practice of accepting life as it presents itself is one of the most valuable lessons to break free from the cycle of suffering. Accepting does not mean conforming passively, but to recognize that peace comes when we stop fighting what it is, when we abandon the incessant struggle against the inevitable. Have you noticed how many times you caught yourself suffering for something that, in the end, had no control? Or for something that only existed in your mind, an expectation you created about something or someone? This is one of the greatest blocks we face in our daily lives: attachment to our ideas. These ideas create a mental film about what it should be, and when reality does not correspond, frustration arises. But when learning to release these unrealistic expectations, deep relief comes. This is where we find the power of acceptance. It is not about being passive, it is about observing and being present with what it is. It is understanding that life has its own pace, and not everything is under our control. Inner peace comes precisely from our ability to drop the ties of expectation and to live fully at the present moment. This does not mean abandoning dreams or goals, but allowing the natural flow of life to lead us more smoothly. And this change of perspective begins to transform our way of seeing the world. By letting out the need to always have control, trying to make everything happen exactly as we want, we make room for surprise and the unexpected. Life becomes more interesting when we are no longer tied to a rigid script. What really matters is our ability to allow us to live, to be surprised by life, to welcome what comes without resistance. And have you realized that when you are less attached to your expectations, life becomes lighter? True freedom comes when we can see life with other eyes, simpler, more true. Instead of getting lost in what has not happened, we have learned to embrace what is already before us with all its beauty. When we talk about living more lightly, we are, in fact, referring to a fuller and most present form of life. If we learn to detach from unreal expectations, we can finally experience true peace. Then, in the next step, to look at another fundamental question that also keeps us in prison: the incessant search for the approval of others. Since we are born, we are shaped by social standards that teach us to seek approval from others. At first, it is natural, such as the smile of an adult or praise for a well-done work at school. These small gestures comfort us and encourage us to continue. However, over time, this search for recognition can become a silent prison, and our happiness begins to depend on the opinion of others. The moment we begin to live to please others, either by a compliment, a smile, or a simple "well done," our identity is validated externally. The consequence of this is a constant sense of insecurity and dependence, as if our happiness were always in the hands of the people around us. This creates an emotional instability that wears us. With each new criticism or absence of recognition, our self-esteem seems to wither, and the void takes over our being. But what happens when we decide to abandon this search for approval? Buddhism teaches us that true freedom comes only when we can cultivate our inner peace without depending on external recognition or validation. When we stop waiting for others to tell us what we are or how we should be, we live according to our own truth. What does this mean in practice? It means that instead of based on our self-esteem on others, we strengthen it within ourselves. No one else has the power to shake what we feel about who we are. This gives us a solid foundation, a confidence that does not depend on the judgment of others. True self-esteem need not be exploded. It is reflected in authentic actions, our ability to be who we are without the weight of external opinion. Freeing yourself from the need for approval is one of the greatest gifts we can give ourselves. At the moment we stop seeking constant validation, we live with more freedom and authenticity. We can finally make decisions aligned with what really matters to us, without fear of making mistakes or displeasing someone. This is the true strength, the courage to be who we are, even if this is not always well received by everyone. It is not necessary to please everyone all the time. We all have limitations, and no one is perfect. In the incessant search for pleasing, we often sacrifice our own essence, shaping ourselves to meet the expectations of others. This creates an internal tension, an emotional wear that can be avoided when we learn to live more sincerely and honest with themselves. Now, by freeing out from external approval, we are not saying that we must be indifferent to others or live selfishly. True freedom is not living without caring about anyone, but living without depending on the judgment of others to feel complete. When we fully accept ourselves, with our qualities and failures, we can connect with others in a more genuine way, without masks and without unnecessary expectations. And as you stop living to please, we begin to understand that true validation comes from within. When we have confidence in our own choices, when we are at peace with whom we are, external opinion no longer has the power to affect us deeply. This allows us to live lighter, with more joy and more authenticity. Now, before we continue, I would like to invite you to reflect on your own search for approval. Have you ever felt stuck to the need to please others? How about sharing your experience with us? Feel free to tell us in the comments, and if the video resonated with you, subscribe to the channel to continue this self-discovery journey. And don't worry, this space here is yours without any pressure. Let's walk together for more insights that can transform your life. The constant comparison is a habit we all face at some point in our lives. From childhood, we have been encouraged to look at each other as a reference, to measure our value based on what others achieve. Whether at school, family, or even social networks, comparisons are always present, often in a subtle way. But the problem begins when we believe that the success of others diminishes ours, or worse, our happiness depends on being on the same level or above someone. We live in an era where success is visible and widely publicized. On social networks, for example, we see only the happy moments, the achievements, and the victories. But it is important to remember that what is in sight is just part of the story. Comparison makes us forget that we all have a unique path and that each journey is distinct, with its own challenges, achievements, and learning. Suffering comes precisely when we ignore this and measure ourselves based on what the other has or did. Buddhism teaches us that every human being has a unique journey, and therefore we cannot evaluate our progress based on the life of the other. Comparing yourself is a way of losing sight of our own trajectory and the value that each step has. Life is not a competition. She is a journey of self-discovery. Each person is at a different time from their walk, with their own challenges and achievements. The personal growth process cannot be measured based on what others do. Each has its own time and its own rhythm. When we stop comparing ourselves, we value our own, even small achievements. Each step taken, however small, is an advance toward our most authentic self. And by accepting our own way, we find that true happiness is not in having more than others, but in appreciating what we already have and what we have already achieved. Failing to compare also helps us develop more compassion for both ourselves and others. When we stop looking to the side and focus on our own growth process, we realize that everyone has their internal struggles, their insecurities, and difficulties. What we see on the other side of the coin is not always the complete reality. When we see the success of others, we often ignore the challenges one had to overcome to get there. Therefore, the comparison is unfair and often painful. Buddhism suggests that we must cultivate gratitude and acceptance. Instead of looking at what the other has, we can focus on what we already have and learn to value it. When we begin to appreciate our own journey, regardless of what others are doing, we feel a sense of inner peace that does not depend on external approval or comparisons with others. This helps us move on with more confidence, knowing that we are on the right track for ourselves. Moreover, the constant comparison prevents us from living fully in the present. We are so focused on how we are in relation to others that we forget to live now. But true peace comes when we set free from this vicious cycle and begin to live with more presence. When we are in tune with the present moment, we can see the beauty of what is around us without having to compare with what has gone through or what it could be. Therefore, true freedom comes from the acceptance of who we are and the recognition that our journey is unique and valuable. When we stop to measure the standards of others, we find more balance and inner peace. And instead of looking at each other with envy or excessive admiration, we can look at him with inspiration, learning from his experiences without diminishing our own value. Have you already caught yourself comparing your life with that of others? What have you learned from these comparisons? How about sharing with us? How has you dealt with it? We are here to hear your stories and reflections. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your comment. We love to hear what you have to say, and this exchange of experiences is what helps us grow. We live in a digital age where technology is omnipresent. Communication, entertainment, information, and even work are largely centered on mobile devices and on the internet. But as much as these resources bring us benefits, the indiscriminate use of social networks and technology can move us away from what really matters, the present moment. We live in a reality in which the connection with the virtual world often disconnects us from the real world. This leads us to a constant feeling of agitation, anxiety, and even empty. Technology itself is not the problem. The problem is when we use it automatically, unintentionally. We took the phone without thinking, rolled the screen without knowing exactly why. We got lost in the updates of others and in the search for something that fills an inner void. Many times we are not even aware of the time we spend online, and the feeling that we are busy keeps us from realizing how much we are moving away from what really matters, our own self and now. Buddhism teaches us to live with presence. With each action, we must be aware of what we are doing. When we use technology unconsciously, we are scattered, and the mind becomes overwhelmed. We are there, but we are not really present. This behavior prevents us from enjoying what we have in front of us, whether it's a conversation, a moment of rest, or even a meal. And the most curious thing is that even with all the facilities that technology gives us, it can also generate a certain kind of emptiness. This is because we often connect more with the virtual world than with the people around us. We become so immersed to follow others that we cease to live our own. Social networks, for example, show us only part of people's lives, usually the edited and perfect part. This creates unreal expectations and a sense of inadequacy, as we begin to believe that our lives need to be as exciting or interesting as the ones we see on the screens. Moreover, as we are constantly connected, we do not give room for silence and boredom, which, oddly enough, are essential to our mental and emotional health. Boredom allows us to reflect, gives us room for creativity, and helps us reconnect with ourselves. But when we are always busy sailing on the networks or responding to messages, we stop living these moments of introspection that are so important to our balance. Buddhism invites us to act with intention. This applies not only to our daily actions, but also to the use of technology. Asking yourself why you are accessing social networks or checking your phone can be a good starting point. If the answer is just to fill a void or escape the present moment, it may be time to reconsider the use of that time. We can use technology to learn, to connect true with others, to share things that inspire us. But this is only possible when we use networks consciously. In addition, technology must be a tool, not a prison. When we start to be more selective about what we consume online, we can enjoy much more what it has to offer. Instead of spending hours rolling feeds or watching videos without purpose, we can choose more carefully what really adds value to our life. This helps us create a healthier relationship with technology, where it does not control us, but serves our goals. When we use technology with more intention, we are also more kind to others. We fail to compare our lives with the edited lives of others and start sharing more authentically. Social networks do not need to be a competition, but an opportunity to share what is true without seeking approval or recognition. This creates an atmosphere of authenticity, where everyone can connect genuinely and significantly. Ultimately, true peace is in the present moment. Technology, when used with intention, can help us live more fully, but when used uncontrollably, it drives us away from what really matters. The practice of presence is critical to achieving balance, and this applies to both the real and digital world. Technology can be a great ally, but it must be used wisely. Now, how about thinking about how technology has affected your life? Have you felt more connected or more disconnected from yourself? Leave your reflections in the comments. And if you are enjoying this self-discovery journey, subscribe to the channel to keep learning and growing along with us. Be sure to share this video with someone you think can also benefit from these insights. We are here to support each other. Talking about others' lives can often seem a harmless way to distract or fill in time. In a conversation between friends or colleagues, it is common for gossip to emerge without realizing it, and what seemed just a light comment can actually be feeding negativity. Gossip has the power to spread distrust, feed judgment, and distance people from each other. Moreover, it often ends up moving us away from ourselves, because by speaking ill of others, we look away from our own internal questions. When we surrender to gossip, the energy we spend on it not only harms others but also harms us. We create a turbulent mental field, where the ego feeds on criticism and comparisons, and internal peace is destroyed. Buddhism teaches us that words are powerful. They have the power to create or destroy, to unite or separate. Every word we use leaves a mark in both people and ourselves. Gossip, therefore, is not just a superficial habit, but a behavior that can generate suffering. When we talk negatively about someone else, we are not just hurting who is the target of the conversation, but also to ourselves. We are feeding the mind with feelings of judgment and criticism, which only increases the internal tension. Silence, on the other hand, is a powerful choice. Choosing not participating in a negative conversation is a form of protection for our mind and heart. Silence is not weakness, but a form of wisdom that prevents us from losing ourselves in external distractions. In addition, gossip also generates distrust. If someone hears that we are talking badly about someone else, inevitably, they may wonder what we would say about her when she's not around. Confidence, which is the basis of any relationship, can be destroyed quickly through thoughtless words. Therefore, choosing to speak kindly, with the intention of healing and not hurting, is an important step towards a more harmonious and compassionate life. Buddhism teaches us the practice of correct speech, words that unite, relieve, inspire. Speaking consciously, thinking about the impact our words will have, is an exercise of compassion. Instead of getting lost in criticism and judgments, we can change the direction of the conversation to something more positive and constructive. This strengthens the bonds between people, creates an environment of trust, and helps us cultivate healthier relationships. When we interrupted gossip, we also interrupt the self-criticism cycle. Often, those who gossip from others are also someone who thinks of themselves hard. When we stop by pointing our finger at others, we start to look more kindly at ourselves, learning to be more understanding and less critical. What we say about others often reflects what we think of ourselves. When we change our way of speaking, we also change the way we see the world. Silence then becomes a powerful ally in the search for inner peace. It does not mean ignoring problems or omitting, but choosing a space for reflection and understanding, where we can process our emotions more in a more balanced way. When we are silent, we make room for the mind to breathe, so that it can break free from unnecessary tensions. Gossip creates a cycle of negativity, but silence chosen with wisdom has the power to interrupt this cycle and open the door to peace. Now, before you go to the conclusion, I invite you to reflect on how you have communicated with others. Have you already caught yourself gossiping or participating in conversations that do not add? What changed when you started practicing the right speech? Share your experiences in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel. We are together on this journey, and each reflection contributes to collective growth. For a long time, the idea of being perfect was considered a value to be sought. From an early age, we are encouraged to be the best, to achieve perfection in everything we do. This constant search for perfection may seem noble, but over time it becomes a prison. Perfectionism leads us to an endless cycle of self-criticism, where nothing is never good enough, where there is always something to improve, something to correct. The problem of perfectionism is not in the desire to improve, but in the idea that we need to be perfect all the time. When we fail to achieve this perfection, frustration and fear of not being good enough. Buddhism teaches us that nothing in life is fixed or unchanging. Impermanence is one of the fundamental laws of the universe. Perfection, therefore, is an illusion. What really matters is constant learning, the acceptance of errors and the ability to move on with humility. Each mistake we make is an opportunity for growth. When we learn to embrace our imperfection, we free ourselves from the pressure of always having to get it right. True progress is not measured by the absence of failures, but by the ability to learn from them. When we accept that making mistakes is part of the process of evolution, we begin to live with more freedom, without the constant concern to fail. Life, in fact, becomes richer when we understand that imperfection is an essential part of human experience. We are constantly evolving beings, and this includes the ups and downs. When we free the weight of perfectionism, we make room for creativity, spontaneity, and authenticity. We can live more true, without fear of making mistakes, knowing that every step taken is a contribution to our journey of self-discovery. The practice of Buddhism teaches us to walk with intention. This does not mean trying to be perfect, but to live with more presence in each action. Instead of perfectly focusing on the result, we can focus on the sincerity of the effort. Life is not about achieving an unattainable goal, but about being present at every moment, learning and growing as we move forward. In the end, true freedom comes when we stop fighting our own nature, when we accept that the path to personal growth is made of attempts, errors, and learning. Embracing imperfection is actually the way to a fuller, authentic, and meaningful life. And if you got here, I want to thank you for following this journey of reflection and self-discovery. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, take the opportunity to do it now and become part of this community that seeks to live lighter and more consciously. Leave your comment, share your ideas, and tell us how you are dealing with these challenges in your daily life. Your presence here makes all the difference, and it is a pleasure to share this journey with you.